office in the OIG community, in the oversight community for 20 some odd years, busting my tail to help the American taxpayer.
Our local law enforcement will stand up for those law-abiding, undocumented people in our state who are doing the right thing.
I look forward to serving the troops, the warriors of this department. It's the honor of a lifetime, and we're going to get to work.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, reshaping the military. President Trump, we have been told, is expected sometime today to sign new executive orders. They will include policies with significant consequences for transgender service members, a ban on several diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and reinstating service members with back pay who were discharged for refusing, back during COVID, to get the COVID vaccine. Plus, marching orders. Pete Hegseth takes the helm at the Department of Defense. His message to the military as he orders troops to, quote, put America first and, quote, never back down. Confirmation carousel. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard get back-to-back Senate confirmation hearings later this week for key positions in the Trump administration. One question that looms over those hearings: could past statements or actions trip them up? Friday night firings. President Trump dismisses more than a dozen federal inspectors general. Their job to tackle waste, fraud, and abuse within the federal government. This unprecedented move not only puts those efforts in limbo, but will likely draw legal challenges. But we start tonight with Weijia Jiang and Nancy Cordes. As the president huddles with House Republicans in Florida, that's where we find Weijia Jiang. And if the president comes out while Weijia is talking, she will have to sit down, and we will sit and listen to maybe some of the president's remarks or monitor them for news as things develop. But Weijia, to start with you, Nancy Cordes on the North Lawn of the White House. I'll get to you on the inspectors general in just a moment. We just set the scene for us at the president's Doral Golf Club with many House Republicans in attendance.
Major, this is a GOP retreat, which means that they are taking a break from the Washington weather and coming here to balmy Miami. And you're right, they are staying at Trump's luxury golf resort in Doral. And they are all gathered here to really hash out policy. Earlier today, we heard from Speaker Mike Johnson, who said it's time to roll up our sleeves and get down to work, because they have to talk about how they plan to execute Trump's very ambitious legislative agenda and how they're going to do that when it comes to money and how much they want to spend and are willing to spend and the processes by which they will do that. So there's a lot of work to be done, but they do expect to hear from President Trump at any moment now. He is scheduled to take the stage. And Major, he will likely talk about and remind them of what he would like them to do. There's also a chance he makes news about those military EOs you talked about. He likes to say it for himself, so we are anticipating that perhaps he announces that he has signed those. But really, at any moment, we are expecting Trump to make an appearance.
And, of course, Weijia, unity among House Republicans, vital to everything President Trump wants to accomplish legislatively. He can't take even two defectors among House Republicans. Do you sense in that room, at this moment at least, there is some measure of unity?
Well, it certainly seems like it, right? Because here they are. They're not on vacation, to be clear, but they are in Miami. Everyone's a lot more relaxed, and we're watching a lot of the members just make their way around the room, a lot of side conversations, because at the end of the day, they want to be aligned. They want to find a way to carry out Trump's agenda, especially because the clock has already started ticking on midterms in less than 2 years now, so they really want to make sure they can unify and maintain control.
Nancy Cordes, to you on the North Lawn of the White House. This action President Trump took Friday to dismiss more than 12 inspectors general, various agencies throughout the federal government. What has been the reaction to it, and what is your reporting related to that?
Well, the reaction from Democrats on Capitol Hill is outrage. The number of inspector generals, which we understand now to be up closer to 17 or 18 individuals, these are individuals who are supposed to be independent. They are not supposed to be beholden to one president or another, because their job, as you well know, Major, having covered so many of their reports over the years, their job is to hold their own agencies accountable, to root out waste or fraud or mismanagement, shine a light on it, to help these agencies operate more fairly, more efficiently on behalf of the American people. So the notion that you would purge almost all of the major federal agencies, cabinet-level agencies, of inspector generals in favor, one would assume, of installing new IGs who perhaps would be more supportive of any president's agenda, is something that is simply unheard of at this magnitude.
And Nancy, as I understand it, President Trump did this the first time. Then Congress passed a law, which is the law governing inspectors general's firings now, that says two things. A president has to provide evidence, substantive evidence, about the reasons for the firing, and notification of Congress of at least 30 days.
Right. He fired a couple of IGs in his first term, and that generated quite a bit of controversy. And so Congress did go ahead and impose these new rules to basically beef up protections around these inspector generals. But guess what? President Trump just broke the rules. He did not provide Congress with 30 days notice that he was going to be firing these inspectors general. And he also didn't say why he was firing them, give any specific reason or any explanation about how they were handling their jobs that he didn't like. But interestingly, Major, the reaction from Republicans on all this has been muted. Most of them who have already spoken out have said essentially, well, it's the president's prerogative. He can put in there who he wants. And sure, he broke the law, but hey, we're moving on. And so it's pretty clear that the Republicans who control Congress are not going to try to act as any kind of break on his power in this particular situation, even if he didn't do what the law demands.
Ouija, I want to go back to you in Doral with the House Republicans and what we expect will be remarks the not-too-distant future from President Trump. You have some news about some scheduling matters this week for the president.
Yeah, we just actually checked in with a White House official right here, so we can report that as for those 3 military executive orders, he has not signed them yet, but he is expected to sign them by the end of today. And we also know that on Wednesday, he plans to sign the Laken-Riley Act. Of course, that is named after the nursing student down in Georgia who was killed by an undocumented immigrant. And when he signs this bill into law, it will be the first piece of legislation he signs. And under this law, federal officers would be required to detain any unauthorized immigrants who are accused of a violent crime. It got bipartisan support. Of course, this was a pillar of his campaign. And so we're expecting that on Wednesday, Major.
Ouija, very good. Thank you. And Nancy, I want to go back to you because, as I understand it, over the weekend, you talked to someone who knows quite a bit about inspectors general and the history.
That's right. I spoke to Mark Greenblatt. He was the Inspector General for the Department of the Interior. He was actually appointed to that position by President Trump himself in his first term, but he was fired right along with so many others. He found out in a very brief email on Friday night. He was just returning from a Taekwondo practice. He opened the email and it was addressed to him, and it said, due to changing priorities, you are being fired. Immediately, he lost access to his email. And I spoke to him over the weekend about exactly what he thinks led to these firings. Take a listen. President Trump said this is a very common thing to do. Is it?
Yeah, that's something that I have to quibble with. This is absolutely unprecedented. There is nothing that's ever happened remotely like this. When President Trump said this is normal, standard course of action, like what happens with the 94 U.S. attorneys, that's just factually not true.
So he's basically crying foul on President Trump's claim that this is standard, that presidents get rid of these inspectors general, bring in their own people. We just haven't seen anything like this at this scale before. But we do know, Major, that it is something that that some Trump allies have called for. It was laid out in Project 2025, get rid of all the IGs so that you'll have more latitude to do what you want as you work to remake the federal workforce. And his own former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, also made the case for it in an op-ed a few weeks ago.
Nancy Cordes on the North Lawn of the White House. Weijia Jiang with House Republicans and soon President Trump in Doral. Thank you very much. 22 states are suing over President Trump's executive order seeking to overturn birthright citizenship. One of them is California's Attorney General. Next, he will join us with more on the legal battle on that front and possibly others. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. One day, that's how long it took for California to sue the Trump administration, or, from another point of view, how long it took for the Trump administration to provoke California into filing a lawsuit. California and many other states are challenging the president's executive order that seeks to end birthright citizenship. It is a move that California's Attorney General Rob Bonta called, quote, unconstitutional and un-American. The Attorney General joins us now. Sir, it's good to have you with us. What is the status of the legal fight over birthright citizenship, and where do you think it's going to ultimately end up?
Right now, we have over 20 states, District of Columbia, City and County of San Francisco, that have all sued the federal administration for its violation of the Constitution on day one. It's trampling of the U.S. Constitution. It's attack on U.S. citizens and children. It's un-American conduct. And a judge has already declared that the executive order is unconstitutional. It has restrained it for now, any implementation of that executive order, and in doing so said there hasn't been a clearer case in 4 decades. It's mind-boggling that the Department of Justice attorneys for the United States could come forward with such an argument and saying that it was blatantly unconstitutional. So we think that this judge's early determination is a signal of more to come, that other judges, if it goes to appeal or other judges weigh in, they will find the same thing, that this conduct is blatantly unconstitutional and the president has overstepped his jurisdiction by a mile.
Mr. Attorney General, how much do you fear that this Trump administration wants this legal fight, wants it to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and is calculating the Supreme Court, as currently constituted, will revisit one and then overturn the historic and precedential understanding of what birthright citizenship is in our country?
I don't fear that. I think it may be their hope, their desire, their reason for advancing this fringe theory, but it's a fringe theory. The plain and unambiguous language of the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause therein clearly states that all persons born in the United States are U.S. citizens. The U.S. Supreme Court has determined that the Constitution means what it says it means multiple times, and it's been the law of this country for over 125 years. So that may be their intention, but I think they really are throwing a Hail Mary here, and the strong weight of the law and the facts are in our favor. We believe will prevail.
Mr. Attorney General, more broadly on the question of immigration and enforcement therein, there will be raids in California. You know that. The Trump administration has made that clear. You have law in California that disallows local participation in those raids. How will that clash play out?
Not really a clash. It's a fully appropriate use of state and local resources to focus on fighting crime, not focus on civil immigration enforcement. There are entities, agencies, departments in the federal government whose job is to enforce immigration laws. They are certainly well within their rights to lawfully do that and may do that. But what they cannot do is conscript or commandeer or force California and local jurisdictions within California to do their job for them. They may do their job, but they may not force California and local law enforcement to do their job for them. We want to focus on enforcing the criminal laws of the state of California, arresting and prosecuting criminals, not be involved in civil immigration enforcement. So I think our roles are clear. The Constitution is clear. The 10th Amendment right for the states to exercise its police power is very clear. So we'll see how it plays out, but we know that we're well within our rights. And if the federal government acts lawfully, they can certainly act within their realm of authority as well.
Mr. Attorney General, as you know, California, Southern California specifically, has been devastated by the wildfires in Los Angeles. Two issues President Trump has raised. One, that to obtain federal aid to assist those ravaged by those fires, California needs to change its voter ID law. And he recently signed an executive order seeking to overhaul or take federal control of California's water policy and instructing the Office of Management and Budget to review all funding for land, water, and disaster responses that flow to California. What are you going to do about that?
My hope and belief is that the president will do what all presidents before him have done, what the time-honored tradition of this country is, which is that the president and the federal administration provide aid to states in need when they are confronting and wrestling with and suffering from natural disasters. What President Biden did for Florida when they suffered from a hurricane. It's what President Biden did for Texas when they suffered from a hurricane. He didn't ask if they're a red state or a blue state. He said, this is a state with Americans in need, and I will provide disaster relief. That's what President Trump should do as well. He ran to be and is the president of the United States of America, not the red states of America, and should provide relief without conditions to California as soon as possible, because, as you mentioned, Angelenos and Californians are suffering and deserve the support.
And do you see yourself filing any legal action to block this executive order seeking to exercise federal control over the Central Valley Project and overhaul or overstep existing state and local policies regarding water?
We'll assess that action as appropriate as and if it's implemented. We'll certainly continue to follow our North Star, which is if the president acts unlawfully, if he breaks the law, if he acts unconstitutionally, if he violates federal law or other applicable laws, we will take him to court. It is a very modest request to ask for a president that is law-abiding. And if he breaks the law, we'll hold him accountable in court, as we had to, unfortunately, on day one, when he trampled over the Constitution with his birthright citizenship executive order. So we'll assess the conduct to follow, how it's applied in California with respect to our deployment of our water resources. And if the president is acting unlawfully, we'll take him to court.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Pete Hegseth takes over at the Pentagon. Longtime Pentagon correspondent and friend of mine, Barbara Starr, joins us next to take a closer look. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for staying with us. President Trump, as my colleague Weijia Jiang pointed out a few moments ago, will later today sign several executive orders aimed at reshaping aspects of the U.S. military.
As the Secretary of Defense, it's an honor to salute smartly, as I did as a junior officer and now as the Secretary of Defense, to ensure these orders are complied with rapidly and quickly.
That is Pete Hegseth, the new Defense Secretary, joining us to discuss this. Long-tenured Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. She is also a senior fellow for the University of Southern California's Annenberg Center on Communication Leadership and Policy. Barbara, great to see you. So these executive orders we expect later today will touch upon diversity, equity, inclusion programs within the Pentagon, significant changes for transgender members of the United States Armed Forces, and reinstating with back pay those who would not take the COVID vaccine during and after COVID. Take those in whatever order you prefer and explain their importance to the military and to our audience.
Well, I think, Major, that a thread does run underneath all of them. All of these were, of course, campaign promises by President Trump. All of them are message points now. All of them have political overtones to them. What Hegseth is going to have to do is get past that political messaging and get into the fine details of how he wants to implement all these and how to make it all work. Transgender, for example, we haven't seen the details yet. Will people be removed from the military? I don't think we know the answer. The COVID vaccine, how many of those people who refused it want to come back into the military? And if they don't come back, will they just automatically get salary for the whole time since they left military service. And of course, the big one, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI programs. Big issue. Hegseth has made a lot of it, but now he has to really figure out what he wants to get rid of and how to make it all work. And he says, and he has said it many times, that he feels those programs have impacted the lethality the U.S. military can deliver.
Is there any evidence for that?
That's exactly where I was going. How did you know that? You know, where is the data? Where's the data that actually shows us there is anecdotal evidence? People have complained. Have standards, however, really been lowered? And has it really reduced the lethality of what many people still say is the most powerful military the world's ever known?
And during the confirmation hearing, there was reference made by then nominee Hegseth, now Defense Secretary Hegseth, to this recruitment crisis in the military writ large. I came across a story that said that recruitment was actually up last year, hit its goals in certain component services of the Pentagon. Where are we with that, and what relevance, if any, does Pete Hegseth have to those goals and aspirations?
Well, there is one thing I think people haven't perhaps paid enough attention to. Not just he served in the U.S. military, but he's a young man. And I would say that perhaps has a lot of appeal. He may, if he works at it, really be able to relate and draw in younger people, which are desperately needed. They might relate to him better than some of the very much older men who have served as Secretary of Defense, let alone the fact we haven't had a woman secretary. So that might be a positive. But he is going to learn very quickly, if you bet he already knows, that part of the recruiting crisis is not that they're complaining about DEI programs, but there is an overwhelming lack of interest, up until now at least, on the part of young people in this country to serve, and many of them are not able to meet the physical requirements of being able to serve. This is a very complex, deep question. All of it has to be addressed, and there are still many, many analysts who will tell you you have to appeal, given all of that, to the broadest spectrum of society to encourage them to join, and that means diversity in the force.
And we have about 30 or 45 seconds, Barbara. What do you think the country should look for in these early days with Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary?
I think that many people are still looking for a level of gravitas that any defense secretary coming into office has to demonstrate. And why do I say that? Because we hope not, but at any moment, that 3 a.m. phone call could happen, and he will have to come up with options and plans and things to present to President Trump to deal with a crisis on a moment's notice. That can happen at any time, and it's going to be Pete Hegseth's responsibility to deal with it.
As perceptive and experienced an observer as the Pentagon as we could have at this table, Barbara Starr.
Thanks, Major.
Thank you very much. Sources tell CBS News that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could visit Washington as soon as next week. This just days after President Trump urged 2 U.S. allies in the Middle East to accept more refugees from Gaza. The president proposed that Jordan and Egypt bring in around 1.5 million Palestinians to, quote, clean out that whole thing, unquote, meaning Gaza. Steve Witkoff, who serves as the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, will travel to Israel Wednesday. He has said his visit will focus on implementing the second phase of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. For more on all of this, let's turn to our Liz Palmer, who comes to us from Jerusalem.
Today was the day hundreds of thousands of Gazans had been waiting for. They got to go home. The line stretched for miles along the Mediterranean seashore. Palestinians who'd had to flee in the opposite direction months ago now streamed north, hoping to find the remains of the houses and the neighborhoods they'd abandoned when the Israeli military ordered them to leave and the fighting drew close. Today there were reunions full of joy. Family members who'd been separated by the war embraced and marveled that they had survived long enough to see one another again. This procession had been delayed for 2 nerve-wracking days when Israel accused Hamas of breaking the terms of the ceasefire and refused to let the Gazans through. But the impasse was resolved when Hamas agreed to release the remaining civilian female hostage Arbel Yehoud later this week. There was more news from Hamas on the remaining hostages, too. Of the group of 33 who have been or will be released under the terms of this phase of the ceasefire, only 25, we learn, are still alive. Back to you.
Liz Palmer, thank you very much. Fixing FEMA. Political voices on both sides of the aisle say, in general, the federal agency meant to address disasters needs some change. But could President Trump's proposals about that turn into kind of a bureaucratic disaster of its own? That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Good to have you with us. We are keeping a watchful eye and receptive ears on President Trump's remarks to House Republicans at his golf course in Doral. If he says something noteworthy, we shall bring it to you in this broadcast. We are monitoring as I speak. Here to discuss other related matters, Sophia Kai and Finn Gomez join me here at the table. Sophia is a White House reporter for Politico and author of West Wing Playbook. Finn Gomez needs no introduction, but I'll give it to you anyway. Political director right here at CBS News. Sophia and Finn, great to see you. Thanks for joining me. Sophia, we talked about this going into the break. This question that President Trump rather surprisingly raised on his way to North Carolina, then to California, either get rid of FEMA, vastly overhaul it. My colleague Margaret Brennan asked J.D. Vance, the vice president, about this on Face the Nation. Control room, play that soundbite if you'd be so kind.
The Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
The idea on the table, as best we can discern it, is just send money to the states and have them administer all this. Sophia, that sounds like a kind of Back to the Future thing, 1960s, 1950s America, not the FEMA and disaster preparation and response that we've seen most recently.
Right. I don't think that ultimately Trump will cut FEMA. Plus, he can't do it on his own anyway.
Congress has to agree.
Right. Yes, of course. And, you know, what he's doing there is something he does a lot, which is put the most extreme proposal on the table. And with the executive order that he's going to do, it really just asks for a task force. He's going to assemble some experts, some agency heads to say, give me some recommendations for changes to FEMA. And, you know, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise because this was an issue that he had with the entire campaign, including when he went to go visit Asheville, North Carolina.
Finn, we had over the weekend, on Sunday in particular, a rapid back and forth that looked like it was moving toward a trade war between the Trump administration and the government of Colombia. By about 11 p.m. last night, it had been resolved Eastern time, just after the second of two Championship Sunday playoff games. Not exactly suggesting they're related, but it all got calmed back down.
Sure.
What, if anything, does that tell us about the tenacity of the Trump administration and the willingness of other trading partners to stand up for themselves, at least for a moment or two?
What you're talking about, Major, of course, is the 19-hour trade war with Colombia, as our colleague Ed O'Keefe calls it. Yeah, but it is, and it was, and it also showed us, I believe, he opened up his playbook on tariffs, what he can do. Look, President Trump did. Look, Colombia is a smaller country. We know that. But right now, 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, it's a crucial partner in what? In flowers, right? So, like,
and don't forget coffee.
Coffee, which AOC, I think, very smartly and very politically astute comment there said, look, this impacts you and coffee for Americans, right? Because the tariffs are applied not to Colombians, they're applied to us, right? So who would you rather, what commodity would you rather buy and where from? So therefore, what he showed us was, this is how I'm going to use tariffs. I'm going to use this as a weapon, as a tool to harness those who do not agree with certain issues that are key to me and my base, including immigration. And he corralled them, and he harnessed, he utilized that weapon, he utilized it as a tool to put them in place. And by the end of those 19 hours, Colombia had agreed.
And Sophia, the underlying issue here was deportation flights and the way that the United States was handling them and the way the Colombian government interpreted the sort of roughing up or disrespect shown to Colombians being repatriated.
Right, and I think the expectation from the Trump White House was that the Colombian government agree to every single one of the asks, which is whenever we send you undocumented immigrants from the U.S., you take them, no questions asked. And up until the point when the Colombian government agreed to all of that, you know, they had said, all of these terrorists have been drafted. We're going to move forward. We're going to move forward until they had all of those expectations met.
And in essence, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say more than not the Colombian government blinked.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. They slow blinked. You know, it was definitely a blink.
And it was a slow blink.
Yeah, but at the same time, two things I think that he should be cognizant of is the growing power of President Trump should be cognizant of the growing power of China in those Latin American countries, right? Are they going to pivot and say, like, fine, we're going to go and China will be our major benefactor here, right? Like there could be some consequences that they may not be prepared for. This didn't happen in this case, of course. But also, I do believe you saw President Sheinbaum in Mexico also this afternoon speaking out against President Trump and the administration's efforts on the immigration as well. She did. So has this caused maybe a domino effect? Well, other Latin American leaders who are key partners in his immigration plans and policies, will they also fall in line, or will they be more vocal about their citizens who are being deported back? I mean, that's something to keep an eye on.
And Sophia, as you know, the United States and Colombia have been very good allies, trading partners. Colombia has resisted the temptation that Finn just raised of other South American countries to orient themselves as trading partners more aggressively with China, been more aggressive toward the United States. So they're supposedly in the safe and good camp, and they still get roughed up by tariff threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, with Canada, too,
Canada,
right? Like,
Mexico,
that
list
first
goes
truth,
on.
I mean, he wasn't in office yet, and Trump sent out this truth about tariffs, and I think within 24 hours, you know, you had Canada's leaders show up to Mar-a-Lago to, you know, have the opening chat with Trump. I mean, that's another example of a U.S. ally being thrown in the thick of it.
And whether there's going to be a fast blink, a slow blink, or an intermediately timed blink, schedule February 1 in your day planners, because in regards to Mexico and Canada, that's when those tariffs threatened by President Trump may actually become real. Finn Gomez, Sophia Kai, thank you very much for joining me at the table. Immigration crackdown operations, enforcement mechanisms, they are ramping up across the country. How much will they cost? A closer look at those numbers next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Trump administration is, as promised, carrying out immigration raids conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other federal agencies. Yesterday, the federal government reported 956 arrests, the most recorded in a single day since President Trump returned to the White House. Jeremy Robbins joins us now. He is the executive director of the American Immigration Council. Jeremy, it's good to have you with us. What would you say is your assessment thus far of these enforcement actions by ICE and other federal agencies and the potential effect they will have on the U.S. economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for having me, Major. These actions are causing a lot of fear, and they're causing a lot of chaos. Everyone agrees we need to take control of our immigration system. We need to figure out, enforce our laws, make sure that we're keeping criminals off the street. But if you look at the sum total of the actions that President Trump has put in so far, these are not actions that are directed solely at criminals. These are actions that are directed at people who are trying to do things the right way. If you look at the border, about how we had a policy that one of the things that President Biden had put in place was something called CBP-1. We didn't want, instead of having people cross between ports of entry, we wanted a system where people could register, make an appointment, show up at a port of entry, and apply for asylum, and that was removed on day one. Going into communities now, we're hearing reports of people going into schools, people are feared about going into churches. It's going to cause a huge amount of fear and disruption, and that's going to mean people aren't going to show up at work, they're not going to participate in communities, they're not going to report crimes to the police, and that's going to have huge impacts, especially economic impacts.
Jeremy, I want to have you listen to an exchange between Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation and the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, about some of the issues you just raised. Control and play that, please.
If you had a violent murder in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
you changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce the law everywhere to protect Americans.
Effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids to school.
I desperately hope it has a chilling effect on illegal immigrants coming into our country.
You think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals?
I think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
Jeremy, your reaction?
Look, I think that one of the things that's clear is we need to enforce our criminal laws. We need to keep our community safe. But as noted in the questions, that's not what's happening here. There was a memo under the Biden administration about enforcement priorities that stated that they were going to prioritize going after violent criminals. That memo was rescinded on day one. This is a whole of country effect. The new regulations that are in place, the new executive orders that came down, the fears, the claims that this is an invasion, these are not focused on violent criminals. They're not focused on our border. They apply equally in Alaska and Hawaii for the regulations that came in on as if there's an invasion in Alaska or Hawaii. These are dragnet impacts that are striking a huge amount of fear, especially into undocumented immigrants, the majority of whom have been here for more than 10 years, the vast majority of whom are working, who are community members. More than 5 million U.S. children have at least one undocumented parent.
Jeremy, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, referred to his hope that this would have a chilling effect on illegal immigrants heading toward the United States. Last week, I came across a couple of stories about farm workers not showing up to work in the Central Valley of California. They're here, they're working, and concerns that the agriculture industry has there about a lack of available labor.
Look, I think one thing that was clear over the last 4 years is that the price of groceries has gone up tremendously, and that is hitting every single American. Half of our fruits and vegetables come from California. If you cannot get the workers to show up and that people are staying home because they're afraid, that is going to devastate our $100 billion agriculture industry. And that impacts the Americans who work in that industry. It impacts people who are working in shipping, who are working in trucking, at the ports, who are doing exports of agricultural goods. And it impacts every American at the grocery store. And that's true not just in agriculture, but immigrants are working in every single industry in the economy. You think about our housing crisis, and if we can't get roofers and you can't get workers to show up to build, that's only going to exacerbate and act as fuel on the fire of our housing crisis.
Jeremy Robbins, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Major.
Survivors of Auschwitz marked 80 years since the liberation of that death camp. They warned of rising anti-Semitism in a ceremony today at the site where more than 1 million people, mostly Jews, were murdered by the Nazis. CBS News' Leah Mishkin has the latest.
It's a horror Teresa Regula lived. Taken from her home, her mother executed, and at age 16, sent to a death camp called Auschwitz because she is Jewish. I repressed all such memories. I repressed them as best as I could, says the 96-year-old. But now the terrible memories are flooding back, including the severe pain she experienced having her head shaved. Holocaust survivor Janina Iwanska can still remember the smell of burning bodies and small children being torn away from their mothers. She says the mothers almost ripped the hands of these children off because they did not want to let them go. More than 1.1 million people, mostly Jews, were murdered at Auschwitz, either in the concentration camp's gas chambers or from starvation, disease, and the cold. Now the nearby home of the Nazi who oversaw the death camp is being transformed into the Auschwitz Center on hate, extremism, and radicalization.
My dream, and those of our colleagues, is that every visitor, every fellow, every academic that comes here takes action to fight extremism and anti-Semitism wherever they come from.
The center will focus on research to fight extremism, working to ensure history does not repeat itself. Leah Mishkin, CBS News.
We should note 56 survivors gathered today to commemorate their liberation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to America Decides. A whistleblower is raising questions about the judgment and handling of sensitive matters while in government. All this about Kash Patel. this arising just days before his scheduled Senate confirmation hearing. An FBI insider says Patel, the nominee to lead the FBI, commented publicly and in violation of government protocol about an ongoing hostage rescue in 2020. This happened, according to the whistleblower, when Patel was serving on the National Security Council during the first Trump administration. Senate Democrats outlined these claims in a letter obtained by CBS News, and this publicity is an overt signal they plan to bring it up during the hearing. CBS News investigative reporter Dan Kleidman joins us now. Dan, outline the questions raised about judgment and protocol.
Well, look, in this particular case that this whistleblower has brought forward, it involves a hostage deal in Yemen in mid-October 2002, where 2 Americans and then the remains of a 3rd American were going to be exchanged for 200 Houthi fighters. The problem is Kash Patel, according to the letter, according to what this whistleblower says, kind of jumped the gun. He called the Wall Street Journal before it was confirmed that these American hostages were in U.S. custody or in safely with Americans, and before his family or their family was notified. And that is a serious breach of protocol. It risks, something going terribly wrong, and of course is not respectful for the family. So people inside the FBI, including this person, who were involved in something called the FBI Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, which coordinates these rescues and these deals throughout the government, were really livid about this and wanted to make sure that the Senate Judiciary Committee knew about it.
And that, go back to the date again, Dan. When did this occur?
We're talking October 14th, 2020. Kash Patel at the time is the senior director on the National Security Council of Counterterrorism. He was not really all that involved in this operation, but the allegation anyway is that he insinuated himself into it and then did this thing that was problematic.
And as I understand it, whistleblower's allegation is not only did this violate protocol, but it sort of speaks to a kind of publicity-seeking hunger on Patel's part that might be so motivating as to jeopardize an ongoing operation, possibly threatening the lives and safety of Americans involved.
Yeah, that is the allegation. The allegation is that he really had very little business, to be involved in this operation at all, and he insinuated himself into it, a kind of grandstanding move. That's not entirely clear. He was, as I said, the senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council. They typically do get involved in hostage situations. So some of that still needs to be sorted out. And Senator Durbin, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, has asked for documents and records of all communications between Patel and this FBI fusion cell, and also what exactly the protocols are. So we're likely to learn more about what Kash Patel did and to what extent he violated these protocols.
And Dan, what does either Kash Patel or those advocating on behalf of his confirmation have to say about all this?
Well, they say 2 things. One, they say that he is perfectly prepared to be FBI director, having served in many national security roles in the Congress, in the executive branch, as a lawyer. And they also say that this whistleblower essentially doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's as far as they get into the actual allegation from the whistleblower. Doesn't know what he's talking about, but don't aggressively counter that portrayal of those sequence of events.
Not yet, anyway. But we'll see, and we'll see how Kash Patel addresses them at the confirmation on Thursday.
Indeed, we will. Dan Kleidman, as always, thank you, sir. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.